Is the DC Black community celebrating Donald Trump's federal takeover of the city? Well, if you listened to Megyn Kelly recently, you might think that they are. And hi, welcome to another episode of At Least You Heard It Here. I'm your host, Alyse Adamson, and this is the podcast where we put the topic of the day on trial. And today's topic, DC residents, Black DC residents, and whether or not they are celebrating this quote-unquote federal takeover of the city. And I bring this to the forefront, ladies and gentlemen, because I was listening to Megyn Kelly. Yes, I do listen to Megyn Kelly's podcast. Sometimes I enjoy it. And on a recent episode, she made the point that Black DC residents are actually happy at this police presence. They are happy at this federal surge. Go ahead and take a listen here.
Mayor been in power so long, I think she's kind of used to how things are going. And I think Donald Trump really wants to clean it up. And I'm all for it.
The crime is outrageous, and you do feel unsafe. I don't know, what's going to occur, whether it's going to be really beneficial for us or not, but something needs to happen.
Every single one of those were Black people, for the listening audience, saying they welcome the Trump intervention there. And honestly, I have been on the south side of Chicago. I have met the mothers whose sons are getting killed in the streets every day. I will bet you, Emily, they would be thrilled to see more law enforcement there and something resembling a safe neighborhood for their children.
I think we need to unpack this, okay? First of all, I just need to make clear, from my viewpoint, there are two things happening here. There's a legal reality, and then there is a factual reality in DC. The legal reality is that the President of the United States does have the authority to, quote unquote, take over the city federally, right? Section 740 of the Home Rule Act does authorize the president, under certain circumstances, like an emergency, to take federal control for up to 30 days. Anything exceeding 30 days needs congressional approval. That is the legal reality. So when we talk about federalizing DC, that's what we're talking about. Then there is the reality on the ground, the factual reality. If you see certain videos like on TikTok, if you hear people talk about a militarization of DC, a federal takeover, that is not exactly what is happening on our city streets. Yes, we have armed National Guardsmen. Yes, we have federal officers on our streets, but they are not on every street. They're in discrete locations like 14th Street, where there's a lot of bars. They are in Georgetown, fancy part of town. They are near federal sites that need protection. They're by Union Station. But a lot of our streets remain the same. They do not have an increased police presence. So take a look here.
Okay, there's some National Guardsmen chatting with some young people. Yeah, that's making us much safer.
I've been going out on various streets every night for the past week to try to find all of the federal law enforcement. And what I've concluded is that they are discrete operations and they're not everywhere. But one place they are is Anacostia. That is an area of DC across the Anacostia River. You've heard people talk about Ward 7 and 8. That is home to several low-income communities and also Black and brown individuals. It's also an area where there's higher crime, unfortunately, because we do know that there is a link between poverty and crime. I've spoken to some law enforcement who have done discrete operations in Anacostia as part of this federal takeover, which I think is more properly framed as a law enforcement surge. And they are in those communities. And this is where Megyn Kelly comes in. This is where this clip comes in. Are Black and brown people happy about the police presence? Well, first of all, that is a loaded question, as it is. Because as we heard all during the last election cycle, Black people are not a monolith. You don't have a single Black beehive mindset. So what the entire Black community in DC at large thinks about the federal takeover cannot be concluded because we all have different viewpoints. We also live in different parts of the city. While Anacostia, right over the Anacostia River, does have a very high population of Black and brown individuals, DC in and of itself has a high population of Black and brown individuals. We don't all live in low-income areas. We're everywhere, right? We are a major part of this city. And so how we view this law enforcement surge is probably more related to our socioeconomic status than it is our skin color. Now, I will say there has been some critique from the administration, from Vice President J.D. Vance, from Stephen Miller, that the people that are most loudly opposed to this takeover are high-income white individuals. I can just tell you what I saw personally when I was out visiting the streets. And here's one of the things I saw at a recent rally. So yes, you can see that a lot of the people, at least from my point of view where I shot that video, they did not appear to be black and brown individuals. Again, that's not to say that there aren't black and brown individuals that want the feds out of DC, but we don't see those types of rallies in the low income areas that tend to have higher populations of black and brown people. So I can't speak for all black people. I can speak for myself. And I can say that I actually think DC needed a law enforcement surge. We do not need a federal law enforcement surge. I am highly opposed to sending in the National Guard. We do not need this. I think it also sets a very dangerous precedent. But I do think that DC ignored a crime problem for a long time. I was also very much opposed to the entire defund the police movement in 2020. I was still a prosecutor at that time. I think that there is a place for police in our society. Now we need to use a data-driven approach. We need intelligent policing. We need implicit bias training. But you know what? That doesn't mean that you don't need the police. And in my opinion, from what I saw as a prosecutor, we needed more of them. We need community policing. We need a police presence. We need a deterrent effect. And that's what we're seeing with this federal law enforcement surge. We're seeing a deterrent effect because we have all of these armed National Guardsmen, feds, and MPD out on the streets. Show of force. That's what the president said. We don't need a federal show of force, but what we needed was like 500 more members of MPD. And it's my belief if the DC Council, if DC had taken this seriously or had taken action sooner, there wouldn't have been any need for the president to have done what he did. So that brings us back. How do the communities who are most adversely impacted by crime, property crime, violent crime, see the surge? Well, we saw with Megyn Kelly, she just used a bunch of clips from black people from those communities that said that they're happy about it. Now, what I want to say to Megyn Kelly is, why is it that you did not interview a black person about how they felt? Why did you not get a member of the community to explain themselves, right? I mean, Megyn Kelly is a journalist. It would have been very easy for her to bring and platform black voices because, as she saw from those clips, I'm sure she could have found plenty to agree that this was the right thing to do, at least bringing more law enforcement into these communities as a show of force for a deterrent value. I think that is not something that she would have had a hard time finding, but instead she had a white analyst on there that agreed with her, and she relied on clips from other news outlets, which could very easily have been cherry-picked. Again, as somebody who prosecuted within these communities, I happen to know for a fact that there are a lot of people who wanted more police, who felt like they were being ignored by the system, right? They don't want to live with crime. And I agree with Megyn Kelly that we've been so desensitized towards crime that folks in these communities were just living with it when it was completely unacceptable. Children should not be dying by stray bullets. It shouldn't happen. Just like our arguments for gun control. I mean, we're seeing more school shootings, an increase in school shootings. When Columbine happened in 1998, I remember it being unprecedented. Sure, there had been Kent State, but those of us who were alive at the time could not believe what we were seeing. Just the unnecessary loss of life that day and the inability for anybody to stop it. But then after Sandy Hook, where there were no other laws passed after children were murdered, and instead it was, we just need to arm more good guys, it was clear that society had been desensitized and we're just willing to live with it. That is something I don't agree with. I don't think that guns should be as easily available as they are. Come at me. I know there's a lot of Second Amendment folks who are going to say, I disagree with you. You're welcome to disagree with me. But similarly, I also don't agree that low-income communities should be living with crime. It's not okay, and we do need to do something about it. So many of my victims, when I was prosecuting, were Black and brown individuals from low-income communities. They deserve justice. They deserve for it never to have happened again. One of the most impactful cases I ever had was a young boy who was wrongly targeted and shot in the head to an inch of his life. And I remember watching that body-worn camera of when police first responded and seeing this young man. I won't even describe what shape he was in because it is so graphic and so disturbing. Thank God he survived, but he's been permanently disfigured. That is unacceptable, and it should not happen. And once again, I know anecdotally, that means I know from talking to people from those communities, from being a prosecutor, that they needed more help, And the police aren't enemies to everybody. Obviously, the Black community has a very complicated relationship with the police. And I'm not sitting up here saying that it is a perfect relationship at all, right? Obviously, we can just see from a lot of innocent Black men who have died at the hands of police that there needs to be reform. But that being said, I can also tell you from having worked closely with MPD, most of the officers are good. And Chris Rock made a joke that just like airline pilots, officers, it can't be some officers are good. Every single officer needs to be good. And that needs to be the goal. There needs to be more training. But as I've also said, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to be supporting our police force, and we need to be supporting our communities. And so I think if Megyn Kelly had taken the time to go and solicit Black voices to talk about this, it would have made her point stronger. Because let me tell you one thing that insults me. It's when we take up the cause of a marginalized group and make a valid point, but do it in service to your own narrative, your own message, and not really care about what that group is going through. Because that's how I took that segment, which is, let me just cherry pick, let me just take a few sound bites from other media outlets to prove my point without bothering to talk to a Black person who's actually adversely affected by crime and who might be welcoming the police surge, right? Like, if you really care, show us you care. Show us this is what this is about. Because we hear a lot about this entire federal takeover being pretextual. That means they're doing it in pretext. They're doing it because Trump wants something else. President Trump wants something else. He wants to federalize cities. He wants to take over. He wants more control. That's what we hear. So when you are supporting what he is doing by using practical examples, using the talking points that this was actually necessary, you should be doing it in a genuine way. Because again, while there are plenty of Black people who reject all of this, reject extra police on the street, there are also Black people who champion it. Because why? Black people are not a monolith. We are all the product of our environment, of our experience, and of our own thoughts, right? We get to make our own decisions on what we agree with. So Megyn Kelly and anybody out there who is using these talking points, I really encourage you to actually talk to a Black person. Go ahead and talk to somebody who's living in those communities and see what they think. And like I said, I think you'll be surprised. I think you will find people who are happy that MPD is getting additional resources. Again, my opinion, we don't need federalization at all. After this 30 days, I think that we can police ourselves, but that means making real changes in DC, being honest about where we are with our crime statistics, because I do believe that DC can govern itself. We need to make a little changes. We need to tackle our crime problem and be honest with ourselves, and we need to support our police department. But that's just my opinion. I want to know what you think. As always, go ahead and drop me a comment. And if you like what you heard, go ahead and click like, subscribe, and remember to tell folks that at least you heard it here.